started. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is the surprising math behind sensor solutions. We're going to be talking about both sides of the sensor equation today, both the costs and the benefits. And sensors are so important for measuring spaces, for understanding how your buildings are being used. But it's also so important to make sure that you understand both sides of the investment so that you can make sure your investment pays off. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today with Andy Schonberger from Intelligent Buildings and our own Ori Franco, CFO of Density. I'll turn it over to both of you so you can introduce yourself, and Andy, if you can introduce Intelligent Buildings as well.
All right. Thanks, Christina. Thanks for having me. Ori, this should be fun. Thanks for joining, everyone. I'm Andy Schonberger, VP Client Services at Intelligent Buildings. For over 20 years, we've been building technology specialists, helping owners and occupiers make better decisions with technology in real estate, really looking to innovate in their buildings and their spaces. We help people baseline what technology they have in their buildings, risks and opportunities with that technology, provide guidance on what to do with it, assisting with their design teams, their operations teams, their management teams, and hold their hand through the operational phase, enabling connectivity services, providing some of those risk management services around cybersecurity of connecting building systems. So really full service around providing answers on technology for building owners and occupiers. Happy to be here and to be a little vulnerable on some of the stories in my experience.
We're so excited to have you because you have so much experience, so much boots on the ground, understanding of how all this works. You've been in it for a long time, so we're excited to hear all your stories. Ori, can you give a little bit of background about yourself and Density?
Absolutely. Thanks, Christina and Andy. And also great to see everyone. I'm Density CFO and have spent a lot of time with my counterparts at our customers and clients talking about their return on investment in sensors. For context, Density builds hardware and software to help customers understand how their workspace is used. Our customers generally use our sensors for four primary reasons. The first is occupancy planning and reducing operating expenses. The second is improved workplace experience. The third reason is access to real and live data, which straddles the first two and provides visibility into how their space is being used. And the fourth is sustainability, lowering your footprint on the world. And all of this is done with an eye on a return on investments in your density sensors. There is a capital outlay up front, and then you earn that return over time. So again, excited to be here and happy to share more about density as we go.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ori. All right, let's get started with when an organization's starting to think about getting a sensor solution in place. Andy, I would love your perspective on what should they be thinking about when considering possible sensor solutions.
First is, what do you want to do with the data? Because then that'll drive the technical solution. What are the outcomes you're trying to achieve? Having sensors in an office space is, to measure utilization for a real estate team to plan out, how the space is being used and what should that mean for the next iteration of their space design. I think is fairly well understood for folks trying to make the best of real estate. But if you open the aperture a little bit, you can use that data for a lot of other things. Build the value of access to that data. Look at, can you right size heating and cooling loads? Can you ventilate for just the right amount of people in the space? Can you use the occupancy count to tailor your hospitality services? Can you use that same data to know how many people are in, a boardroom? And that might tailor what type of AV is provided by the IT department. There's so much you can do with a rich data source like this. You just need to think about what other departments inside a real estate organization could use it. And then that'll help you generate some more, interest in getting to a technology answer. Then the engineering, the sensor placement, the communications infrastructure to power and transfer that data become a lot more of a technical question. So I always say with our clients, start strategic. What are the outcomes you want to achieve first? And then it becomes so much easier to solution to achieve that outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a smart piece of advice. Start with your why and go from there. Ori, let's zoom in a little bit more specifically. I know all workplace stakeholders, but especially CFOs, are looking at the cost behind these solutions. So could you walk us through a little bit more around what those costs might look like for different types of sensor solutions?
Yep. And Christina, if you want to share the first slide. Exactly.
Cool.
So
There we
a
go.
couple of things to consider when dissecting the cost of your sensor installation, overall the cost of your sensor project. This is important in calculating the return that you get on those sensors. And here's how we think about it, or here's how we think about it with our customers. We sort of define the cost of owning your sensors as total cost of ownership. This really encompasses the below and considers everything from the hardware costs to software to installation and importantly, ongoing maintenance. Next is latency and data. Latency and accuracy, I should say, of data. How real time you will get that data. In the example of a battery system, the more real time you get data, the quicker batteries die. So something to consider. Then we have wiring and cabling costs. While density is a system that is all wired, for improved latency and reduced maintenance, battery systems have less upfront costs around wiring, but they still do have wiring for hubs, which typically have to be in visual distance or visual sight of their sensors. The next is field of view, how much space any individual sensor measures. Battery life is a big one. So how often you have to replace batteries on the battery side of the ledger, the operational implication of that, and the actual cost of the batteries, and then ongoing maintenance. Wired systems typically have de minimis maintenance, similar to access points in offices, but battery-powered systems at scale require both investment, sort of capital investment, and operational complexity to keep them operating. So these are some of the things that we think about. And then if we go to the next slide, we could look at what a cabled versus a battery operated system cost. This is for an actual sort of 350,000 square foot deployment, again, a scaled deployment. And what you'll see is the comparison in a couple of key metrics. So a density system would require, in this instance, about 1,561 sensors. Whereas a battery-operated system with a smaller field of view would require about 3,900 sensors. The ongoing maintenance of a density system is negligible. There's almost no ongoing cost, whereas a battery-operated alternative has about $230,000 in maintenance. You could see the assumptions that we made on the right side. But I think more importantly is the need to replace thousands of batteries over a 3-year life. So whether it's every 12 months or 18 months, depending on the latency of data, the sort of bottom line is you're going to need to be replacing these batteries. And then finally, the 3-year TCO or total cost of ownership is about 25% more for a battery operated system when considering the incremental sensors, the maintenance on the back end, and the installation or the wiring for hubs. And you could, again, see some of the assumptions that we made. Battery operated systems typically have 2.5 battery sensors per one density open area sensor. We assume that there are about 30 sensors per hub, and it costs 17 minutes to install and commission the sensors, and about 10 minutes to replace the battery. So made reasonable assumptions based on what we're hearing in the market. And what you'll see is both it's operationally more complex and less cost effective over the long term.
Yeah, it's so interesting how the battery replacement can be a hidden cost. And it can also have implications on the data. Like if you have a dead battery in a sensor, that's not picking up any data. So trying to stay on top of all of that, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Andy, can you share some of the ways that you've seen these a sensor shortcut, like choosing battery, backfire?
Yeah, this is from personal experience. Excuse me, I just like choked up a little bit there.
Hey,
So
it's a safe space here.
yeah, the note here is don't do what I did in a former life. So I was a keen engineer working for a kids charity doing environmental education. This is this building called the Earth Rangers Center, just north of Toronto. We were trying to hit net zero, trying to show stakeholders we were walking the talk about having a bright green building. We did a deep energy retrofit. You can see the solar panels were added to the parking lot. We put geothermal in, and we just threw technology at this building to drive down our environmental footprint. Wonderful. One of the mechanical engineer's design recommendations was really fine zoning to control heating, cooling loads, and to have that occupancy data. So we looked and found in the market a combination sensor, Zigbee backhaul on the data. that we could put into some very unique spaces where cabling would have been very expensive. There was a lot of cinder block installs, looked really clean, but really hard. Everything would have been surface mounted, and all the stakeholders hated the look of what the wiring might have been. So we thought, great, let's go wireless. There's good sensors out there. This is in the heyday of buzz around IoT sensors, right? So we're going to get some relatively inexpensive sensors that'll connect to the building automation system. Bob's your uncle. Low install cost. Give us the data we want. Now we can run the building the way we want. Vendor said these sensors should last up to 3 years. And we thought, great, and didn't think twice about all the things that Ori just told us to pay attention to in the design because we didn't know any better a decade ago. So we started cranking up the data polling. We wanted to get real life data. We were checking on humidity like crazy. And we crushed the batteries in these things in like 3 months. And suddenly mechanical systems aren't working right. They're failing open in terms of some of the valves on the radiant heating and cooling system. Just a nightmare. And, we were running this as a not-for-profit organization. I didn't have a large property manager or somebody to go and start fixing things. So we started checking the voltage on the battery ourselves with a multimeter. We went around with a little drill. We drilled holes in the sensors, and we were testing with our probes the voltage to know whether we should change batteries. This is not at scale like Ori was talking about with 300,000 feet. This is 60,000 feet, but showing you the lessons learned here. We didn't think about that total cost of ownership. We just thought it's cheaper to install, it's going to work, move on. So don't do what I did. Look at all of these lessons learned. There is a time and a place for wireless, particularly if there is a real cabling concern, or if it's a temporary installation to try and get an idea of what's in a space, for a redesign or a retrofit of something. But I just have a visceral reaction to when anybody says, should I cable this or go battery powered? And I'm like, oh my God, yes, please, wired. I don't want to do that again. We'd actually tried as a Band-Aid to use the automation system to pull the device because we could actually get the battery voltage out of the sensor. That actually made the battery life worse because it was now another data connection point that we were asking it to do once a day or something. So don't do what I did here. The net of it is we found ways to keep it running, and we found some cheap battery sources, but not ideal, right? So basically follow Ori's guidance, or get expert opinion on your design or on your technology selection before you just wing it and think you can stick some technology bits and bobs together and get an answer, because you'll probably pay for it longer term on the operations side.
Well, thank you for sharing your hard-won wisdom. It's definitely very brings it to life when you hear a story like that. Ori, what have you heard from density customers on the subject of battery sensors?
There's certainly use cases for battery sensors, and echo everything that Andy said. Generally, they're easy and inexpensive to install. 15 to 20 minutes per sensor, peel and stick. Does not require as much money up front for the install, and they're good for directional data. Given the battery and the battery life, you have to make a decision about latency of data, how much data you want, the accuracy of data, because if a battery dies, you're not going to be getting data from that sensor. But that could be good enough, and it could be directional, and we sort of understand that there are certain use cases for that, and those use cases are typically temporary studies, where you want to directionally understand whether or not you should roll off a lease or shut down an office, and you want a quick, easy solution for that. What we don't see is more permanent solutions or more permanent buildings or real estate investment in battery-powered solutions. That's number one. Number two, what we don't typically see are battery solutions sort of at scale. Again, just the sort of need to replace thousands of batteries for a scaled solution, a couple of 100,000 square feet solution just feels really challenging operationally. Who's going to do that? Your IT team, your workplace team. You're going to outsource it to electricians and low voltage installers. It's one, expensive, two, creates gaps in data, and three, complicated to maintain.
I used a summer student to change batteries to try and keep costs down. Don't do that.
Don't do that. Use an intern.
Yeah.
Internship from hell.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Andy, what have you heard from customers, intelligent building customers, on this topic and ways they've seen kind of?
Yeah, so going back to my professional job instead of a couple of lifetimes ago, if you will, we have had clients ask us to standardize this. Part of what we do is provide that guidance to simplify some of these decision-making points. And one of our clients, large real estate organization, global footprint, very sophisticated, a lot of hoops to jump through for anyone to connect to a network that they own or manage or even just touch. And they had a challenge with project teams around the globe being consistent about how to install occupancy sensing, utilization sensors, and a couple of other endpoint sensors in spaces consistently so that corporately they could actually make sense of the data. They had things happen like, oops, someone forgot to put the sensor in, punch a hole in the wall and just stick it here, that'll work. And then it was facing nothing, so the data was garbage. Or, someone didn't like that sensor was pointed at them, so they taped over it. They blocked it because they didn't have a change management program in place. And or even engineers not understanding that there should be a sensor in certain location because they were thinking, oh, IT is going to provide that later. So they didn't think about it in terms of aligning locations of some of these sensors to the actual zoning and having that all aligned for space planning and management purposes. So this client asked us to help them standardize that while still working within some bounds set by procurement, meaning they couldn't sole source sensors. Density is one of those 3 vendors that's kind of pre-approved, that's gone through all the cybersecurity vetting and how is your data flowing and privacy issue vetting and all of those sorts of things. But they needed to have, procurement hoops to jump through. And I'm sorry you guys have to go through that, but this is the nature of our clients sometimes. And we provided guidance that they could give to their local mechanical engineers, their architects, about how to install it, how it should look, right down to, do's and don'ts on the drywall when you're going to install these things and you're going to run Ethernet cable through the wall, and how that's going to go in the cable tray, and aesthetics, and where it should be connected locally. So all that guidance, so it just de-risked everything for the local project teams. And now the real estate organization corporately knows they're going to get consistent access to data, and they can trust that it was done right. And they can focus on the change management, local, communication with folks moving into that space about what is this new sensor they see on the wall per zone and those sorts of things. So it doesn't sound like a hard thing, but in a lot of cases, technology can become a local decision. And when you're looking for global data sets and reliable information to make portfolio level decisions, you have to drive some standardization like this, right down to what protocols are the sensors speaking, so that that it's compatible with your analysis tools, with your visualization engines, keep going, all those enterprise solutions to make, real estate decisions on a global footprint scale like this. So not a complex process, but man, going through all those stakeholders and the differences by region and protocols and sometimes regulations by region about what some things that are and are not allowed, or maybe domestic content restrictions and things. So it had a little bit of hair on it when we had to address this for the client. But now this is a living document that they're going through and updating as things change, or they want to add more granularity of sensors, or they want to add a new space type that they're going to add this to. So a bit more holistic of a look at this, as opposed to the way I tried to do it with duct tape and sticky tape last time I did this.
Yeah, you can definitely see where it's helpful for an organization when they're getting started with all this to have some expert help, but we'll get to that in a little bit. I would like to pivot over to the fun side of the equation, the ROI. Andy, could you speak to a little bit of how you've seen sensor solutions provide ROI for customers?
Yeah, I mean, the primary one is knowing how much space you need, how it's being used. You need to lease that much space. I mean, that's been a trend for years in real estate. Make sure you're using your space as best you can. It's expensive, and especially in really high-end markets. So that's a no-brainer, to make sure you understand, if your HR department says they need more space, do they really? How's the space being used, to answer that? But with our clients, what we spend a lot of time talking about is how to use that data in other avenues. Can you use that data to be more efficient? Can you, for example, use the number of people in a space to change the ventilation rates, thus your outdoor air mixes? Can that make the space healthier with just pure fresh air instead of recirculated air, while not decreasing air quality and not also spending a fortune on heating or cooling? Being in Canada, if you use 100% fresh air, that could be expensive in January to humidify and heat up that air. Now, if you're only providing the amount of ventilation for the exact number of people in the space, there's actually guidelines on exactly how to do this. Great. Sweet spot right in the middle. Or use that data to task hospitality services around stocking up supplies in washrooms, on floors. That just stops waste. We've got a couple of clients that have saved millions of dollars per year just by knowing how many people went in and out, and doing some collaboration with their hospitality services provider to right size when places are serviced. Just makes a ton of sense. So use that data. The net of this is use that data for other things to help build the ROI. So yes, it may make pure sense on its own, but if you've got extra value add, you get a lot more alignment across an organization to deploy some of these services solutions.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love some of those examples. They really bring it to life, all the possibilities. Ori, can you share some of the examples you've seen from density and how customers are getting ROI?
Yeah, I would just continue that thread that Andy started around cleaning, for example. So understanding which space is used, which space is not used, as we think about more creative ways to use sensors, you can save about 30% on your cleaning bills or on your cleaning expense. But the sort of core reason why people use sensors is occupancy planning and employee experience, just two like very tangible examples. One of the largest companies in the world deployed density sensors and earned a 7.5 times or 7.4 times return on that investment by fitting more employees in their space. They took a sort of an agile approach towards occupancy planning, and they increased sort of desk sharing ratios for their employees when they were in office a couple days a week. Another large real estate firm saved about $1.7 million annually by consolidating space. So there's a whole range of reasons why people use sensors, but there is a real tangible benefit in terms of cost savings, in terms of some of the more creative ways to manage OpEx or manage ongoing maintenance associated with buildings. And then finally, employee experience, improved retention, improved experience for your employees, particularly as companies start to bring employees back to the office. We know it's happening. There was a big announcement with Amazon bringing employees back to the office 5 days a week. They want to make sure that employees are having the best experience in doing so. It's a shift from the way we've been working for the past couple of years. And so sensor data enables you to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point because no one wants to come into an office only to like not find their meeting rooms or their phone booths that they need to get their work done. Like that's not a great experience. So yeah, great example.
And I would just say that sensor data or good sensor data provides you real-time data. So if you're an employee, you know what space is used at any given time, whether it's a meeting room or phone booth. Those are the type of experience related items or changes that companies are making to make it easier to bring employees back to the office.
Yeah, that's great. Are there any other ways to get ROI from sensors?
I would just add that this isn't just an office specific thing. There's definitely value in other asset classes. If you think of multifamily, if you're in a high rise, I'd love to know if those amenities are really busy before I decide to go downstairs and, go in the gym, or see what the parking spaces are like for, for my visitors that are showing up. There's a lot of other use cases across asset classes where having this type of data is valuable. Another example in retail, it's almost the same on the hospitality side and office, but a lot of our clients know very well that if those washrooms are not clean, those people aren't staying in that mall very long. And there's direct correlation to how much they spend, and tenants want to know that. So, okay, so now how do we make sure that these washrooms are at top notch for families that are going there for an afternoon or what have you? And it's not necessarily in that case about how much are we spending on toilet paper. It's about top level service. And that way you can tie it directly to how is it being used. And you can tie your service contracts to peak use at Christmas, say, when you know it's going to be all hands on deck. And that's directly correlated to spend per person. Like, this data can be really useful regardless of asset class, is the point.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's nothing worse than a disgusting mall bathroom.
And I would also say that the asset classes are expanding. We were excited to announce last week a self-installable unit that customers can install themselves. That opens up the range of assets that can use density sensors, from Airbnbs to cafes to advertising firms to undertake to understand sort of how long people are staying and looking at different advertisements. So the sort of market has expanded as the sensor hardware technology has evolved.
Yeah, yeah, it's very exciting to have that installability threshold just like down, no
Yeah.
longer there. So
It removes the cost of installation. It removes 75% of the cost of the sensors. So we're excited to share that.
all right. Any final tips on how organizations can get the most out of their sensor solutions? And if I was an organization, what's the gnarliest question I would want to ask in an RFP? Or
I
you
can,
want to, oh, sorry.
Lori,
Yeah,
go
sure.
ahead. I
I'll
will
kick us
step on your
off.
toes. Go
I
ahead.
think to us, it's all about privacy. Privacy at the source, and ensuring that you don't have cameras in your offices, which just feel weird and icky. Um, but as you think about your investment in sensors, the thing that we like to work with our customers on are what's your desired outcome. Let's like figure out what you're trying to solve for and work backwards to make a thoughtful decision and to help you achieve that goal. That is, the utmost importance to the way we work with our customers to ensure that they're one, it's achieving that desired outcome, but two, seeing a return on their investment in density sensors. And so having that open line of communication and that plan is really critical as you think about sort of your sensor program.
How
Yeah,
about you,
or
Andy?
I was going to add the change management. Make sure people understand what you're doing and how you're doing it. I
Yep.
got an anecdote of a client that put in some PIR sensors, and they were some of them were under seats and some of them were under desks. And the idea was, oh, they're unobtrusive. Nobody will be bothered, and it's not, there's nothing HR needs to know about anyway. This is just, occupied or not. And some people really did not like the fact there was a sensor under their desk pointed at them in weird ways. Even though it was not a camera and there was nothing personal about it, it just didn't look right. So that did cause some issues. So get ahead of all that, right? Look, I think everyone's used to being tracked. We've got our phones. We're used to, YouTube knowing the next video we'd like to see because of how we viewed in the past. I think everyone understands in an office there's a ton of technology, that's being used to manage the space. As long as it's clear and open as to how it's being used, all good, especially when you're communicating and able to offer those better experiences or a healthy space with that data. It just makes so much sense. You just trust people with communicating the intent, and you're a lot better off.
Yeah, we've heard stories about companies using, cameras in like video conferencing cameras in meeting rooms, and it just like creeps people out. They don't want to sit in a meeting room thinking that they are being recorded or tracked to ensure that as the data or as the cameras need that data in order to understand if the meeting room is occupied or not. So sort of echo what you're saying about just the weird employee experience.
Well, think about that retail environment. If a camera's pointing at the entrance to the washroom, that's also a little odd, isn't it? As
Yeah.
opposed to, something that can people count that does not have a lens pointed at the door of the bathroom. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same data source, right? Cameras can count people nowadays with the analytics engines that can layer on top of the camera feeds. From an engineer's perspective, data's data. Not quite. People are people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that privacy aspect goes a long way in what you were saying, Andy. The change management or, trying to make sure people feel comfortable with the solution. I think knowing that it's not actually a camera looking at you I think it makes people feel more comfortable. Great. Well, this has been an amazing discussion. We do have a few questions that we're going to jump through in Q&A. The first is, what do I do if IT doesn't want to help me?
Yeah, we live and breathe this, especially with building owners who may not have access to IT expertise at every asset. So in a lot of cases, we provide that as a service. And for some occupiers too, who don't want some of this edge technology in their space on their enterprise networks, their corporate IT folks just say, absolutely not. You're not going to put these sensors on the same network as my trading floor. those sorts of things. So there are architectural and technology and service ways to address this, to keep it separate, to keep the data secure, encrypted, local data backed up, and some monitoring going. We power these on a regular basis for clients. So there are options out there. There are tools available in the market. So you can still have an answer to that without necessarily having to beat your head against the wall with corporate IT. I think in some cases we feel like marriage counselors between real estate and IT. And sometimes it works and you're able to educate them. In other cases, they just don't want anything to do with it. So there are ways to do it. I mean, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. We can point you in one way or another with our advisory.
That's great. All right. And a last question. How much does a wired system cost to install? Ori, I think you're probably a good one to answer this.
With or without interns, Ori.
Yeah, without interns, exactly. Between $300 and $550 a sensor, big sort of variation around whether it's a union building or not, whether it's overnight work or weekend work or daytime work, whether it's new construction or retrofit. So that is the sort of typical wired sensor cost. That said, again, free advertisement, Density released a self-installable unit, which we're really excited about, fully takes that cost away, and reduces the overall cost of ownership by about 75%. So excited about that. But for the core wired open area sensors, between $350 and $550 a sensor.
All right. Okay, last question. We talked a little bit more about office spaces, but can we maybe expand a little bit more around beyond offices? What kind of use cases we see?
Yeah, we kind of touched on, some of the retail aspects. I mean, think about how valuable that data is to tenants, in an enclosed mall, as to what's happening in a space and some of the demographics, and that can augment some of the data sets they've got already. We talked repeatedly about, some of the smart washroom use cases, if you will. A lot of our clients, as I mentioned, are using that demand ventilation that is based on people count to shave loads in buildings. Think about an office tower whose peak load is directly tied to the hottest point of the day. Well, if the building goes half empty because people go to lunch, why are we cranking the air conditioning to keep up if the building's half empty compared to where it was an hour before? So we can match some of those loads. You can tell I'm an engineer and a complete geek on some of this stuff, but the data is valuable when you can think of what else could I use it for, right? You could use it, to validate that a technician's, been into a space on a regular basis for predictive maintenance. Has the elevator technician been in there to check the belts? The work order says so. Did I see that space get used? In a matching time. There's lots of ways to be creative about it. And when the cost of a sensor is so much lower, as Ori just mentioned, than thousands of dollars in operational headaches like I inflicted on myself in my past, you suddenly start thinking about how valuable that data is for other reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, geeking out about highly practical uses of data, I think it's definitely worthwhile.
And
All right.
I would just say, sort of garbage in, garbage out. The quality of the data needs to be
Yes.
good enough to make those decisions.
Hundred-
And so ensuring sort of accuracy of data is really important. And then just would add that, we see hospitality use cases, campus use cases, like libraries and sort of real-time availability of real-time availability of rooms within libraries. So well beyond just workplace.
Yeah, yeah, lots of possibilities. Well, I think we're just about out of time, but thank you so much. This has been a super interesting conversation. Thank you both for geeking out with me on the surprising costs of sensor solutions. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining. Have a good
Thanks,
one.
all.
Thanks for having me.